How does a massive, record-breaking government shutdown, one that's costing the economy billions, hurting families, how does that suddenly become this huge test? Like a test of fiscal discipline versus maybe short-term politics?
Well, it becomes that test when you look at the actual numbers.
Yeah.
The trajectory for federal spending, it's just not sustainable in the long run. So this current shutdown, it isn't just a political squabble.
Right.
It really gets down to a fight over how we budget federal money, the whole structure.
And that's our deep dive today. We're digging into the sources around the 2025 federal government shutdown. As we speak, early November, it's past 36 days. That makes it the longest ever in U.S. history. It wasn't a surprise, really. It happened because Congress just couldn't agree on the appropriations bills for the 2026 fiscal year.
Exactly. And the core disagreements are pretty complex. You've got these big fights over the overall spending limits,
Okay.
then specific cuts. And interestingly, demands for rescissions, that's a technical term, basically means canceling money that was already budgeted but not spent. Oh, okay.
Like clawing back funds.
Sort of, yeah. And in this case, it was focused mainly on foreign aid funds.
Got it. And then looming over everything, the big fight about health insurance subsidies.
Yeah.
You know, the ones linked to the Affordable Care Act.
That became the flashpoint.
But the immediate cost, the real hit to you, the taxpayer, the citizen, it's already huge. We're talking about, 900,000 federal workers furloughed.
A massive number of people affected directly.
And the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they're estimating this shutdown will cut the annualized GDP growth,
Right.
real GDP growth,
Yeah.
in the fourth quarter by somewhere between 1.0 and 2.0 percentage points.
Which is a significant economic drag. So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to use the materials provided to really break down the arguments for fiscal responsibility. That's the core of the Republican position here.
Yeah.
And then look at the consequences, the serious, measurable fallout from this deadlock. We need to compare the scale of the debt problem to what they're actually fighting over right now.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into the weeds of the political fight itself, we really need to understand the fundamental issue that people pushing for these spending cuts are raising. It's about the sheer scale of federal spending.
Exactly. When Republicans talk about fiscal discipline, they often point back to the Constitution. Article 1 gives Congress the power of the purse.
Sure.
But the argument is Congress has kind of lost control over its own spending,
Oh, so?
primarily because of mandatory spending. This is really the heart of the long-term issue. Things Social Security, Medicare, certain veterans benefits. These programs operate more or less on autopilot.
Meaning they don't need a vote every year.
Precisely. There's no annual congressional oversight vote required for them to continue. And because of that lack of an annual check, mandatory spending now makes up, get this, 76% of all federal spending.
76%. Wow.
Yeah.
That's almost everything.
It's the vast majority, which means all these shutdown fights, the annual budget battles, they're mostly happening over less than a quarter of the total budget.
While 3/4 just keeps rolling along.
Exactly. And the projections, based on current law, they are genuinely alarming. The sources call it an unsustainable path. Mandatory spending alone is projected to increase by $18 trillion over the next 30 years.
Okay, 18 trillion. That really puts the sound money fiscal discipline argument from the Republicans into perspective.
It does. They're essentially saying, look, if tackling that huge chunk of mandatory spending is politically almost impossible right now,
Which it seems to be.
then the only thing we can control is the discretionary part. And they believe the growth in that discretionary spending has to be reined in, brought back to pre-pandemic levels, maybe even lower.
So focus on core responsibilities.
That's the stated priority. National defense, law enforcement, border security, those are the priorities mentioned. And then cut back sharply on other things, especially agencies viewed as less essential or maybe wasteful.
So from that perspective, a shutdown might be seen as, well, necessary leverage.
It's framed that way. A tool to force a needed restructuring of spending habits.
Okay. Which brings us right back to the immediate trigger. If the big, scary number is $18 trillion in future mandatory spending, why did everything grind to a halt over health insurance subsidies? Yeah. This is where it gets really interesting, like you said.
Yeah, because you have to fight over something Congress actually votes on each year, or at least periodically. And those ACA subsidies, specifically the enhanced ones, fit the bill.
Remind us about those enhancements.
Sure. They were boosted back in 2021, part of the American Rescue Plan Act, then extended through the end of 2025. The big change was getting rid of the income cap.
Ah, right. It used to be 400% of the poverty line.
Exactly. About $84,600 for a couple. Removing that cap meant a lot more middle, even upper middle income folks could suddenly get these tax credits for insurance.
Which understandably made the program way more popular. A lot more people had skin in the game.
Definitely. And that set up the confrontation. Democrats basically drew a line in the sand. No spending bills pass unless these enhanced subsidies are extended. Some even wanted them made permanent.
And they countered with a proposal to increase health spending overall.
Yeah, by a huge amount, like $1 trillion, signaling they weren't backing down.
Okay. Meanwhile, the administration, congressional Republicans, their public stance was firm. Deal with the subsidies after the government reopens. Pass a clean continuing resolution, a CR, first.
Right. They painted the subsidy demand as Democrats holding the government hostage for a specific policy goal.
Okay, let's talk scale again, because this is where the fiscal discipline argument gets, well, complicated. How much do these enhanced subsidies actually cost?
Good question. The estimates say making them permanent would cost around $350 billion over 10 years.
Okay, $350 billion over a decade, so about $35 billion a year for that enhanced portion.
That's the rough annual figure, yeah. $35 billion.
Now, $35 billion is still real money, especially if you're trying to control debt, but the sources you provided make a comparison, don't they, to the tax cuts?
They do, and this context is crucial. The permanent tax cuts, particularly those benefiting the wealthiest 1%, are estimated to cost about $132 billion per year.
So wait, $35 billion a year for the subsidies is the sticking point causing the shutdown. While $132 billion a year in tax cuts, mostly for the very top earners, isn't really part of this specific shutdown negotiation.
That's the tension the source material highlights. If the absolute top priority is fiscal discipline, reducing the deficit, why focus laser-like on the $35 billion health subsidy while the much larger $132 billion tax cut remains largely off the table for cuts, often supported by the very same people demanding spending restraint?
It really suggests the fight isn't just about the dollar figures themselves. It's about which dollars, which programs get targeted.
It certainly points towards political priorities playing a huge role, not just pure accounting, and the irony gets even deeper.
I saw.
You look inside the Republican Party itself, the official leadership position was no subsidies in the CR. But the sources show over a dozen House Republicans, including some very conservative members like Marjorie Taylor Greene, actually publicly called for keeping the subsidies.
Seriously. That is surprising. Given the long history of opposing the ACA, why would they break ranks?
Simple answer, their constituents. The polling backs this up. 58% of people overall, and that includes a majority of Republicans polled, wanted the enhanced subsidies extended.
Wow.
So those dozen or so Republicans, they heard from people back home, people who had gained coverage, who relied on those subsidies. They knew taking that away would cause real pain in their districts.
So the ACA, or at least these subsidies, became politically much harder to attack than maybe anticipated.
Much harder. It shows how programs, once established, create their own political reality. Using it as shutdown leverage turned out to be painful, even internally.
Okay, so this brings up a critical question. We've got the political theater, the internal party splits, the fight over subsidies that are actually pretty popular and cost less than other items. What's the real irreversible damage from this record-breaking shutdown?
Yeah, beyond the politics, the damage is real and measurable. We're not just talking about a temporary slowdown anymore. The CBO estimates that somewhere between $7 billion and $14 billion in real economic output in GDP, it's just gone, lost forever, not recoverable even after the government reopens.
$7 to $14 billion vanished.
Yeah.
And the weekly cost?
The National Economic Council director put the weekly hit to the economy at around $15 billion. That adds up incredibly fast.
And the human cost? I mean, hundreds of thousands of federal workers not getting paid. That's mortgages, groceries.
Absolutely devastating for those families, and essential services start to break down. But this shutdown went further than previous ones in terms of the administration's approach.
What do you mean?
Historically, shutdowns meant furloughs, temporary, unpaid leave, but the job is usually waiting.
Right.
But the source material shows the Trump administration did something unprecedented. They told agencies to prepare for permanent layoffs, actual reduction in force plans, or RIF.
Permanent layoffs, not just furloughs.
Correct. This wasn't just about pausing spending. It was framed as using the shutdown to actively shrink the size of the federal government permanently.
And President Trump himself.
Yeah.
Didn't he call it an opportunity?
He did, publicly. An unprecedented opportunity to cut what he called Democrat agencies. It was a clear signal that the goal wasn't just budget discipline, but reshaping the government itself through the shutdown mechanism.
Did those layoffs actually happen?
Yes, the sources state over 4,100 workers got formal RIF notices, permanent layoff notifications, that included almost 1,500 people just in the Treasury Department alone.
Wow, so that RIF strategy really signals a different objective, not
Yeah.
just trimming spending, but actually reducing the government's capacity.
It strongly suggests that, for at least some driving the shutdown, the goal was fundamentally altering the federal workforce, using the crisis as leverage to do it outside the normal budget process.
And while this was happening, what about basic services for citizens?
They took immediate hits. Programs like WIC Women, Infants and Children faced cuts, partial suspensions, full suspensions in some areas. Benefits stopped flowing
That affects the most vulnerable people.
directly. And then the really alarming one. The Department of Agriculture announced that SANAP benefits food stamps would not be issued for November, period.
No food stamps for November.
None. And the department explicitly put the blame on the Democratic Party for the funding lapse. The backlash was immediate and intense.
I can imagine.
It led to lawsuits from more than 24 states. They saw the shutdown moving from a political fight in D.C. to something causing direct, widespread public suffering, especially by weaponizing food assistance.
So let's try to pull this together. What does it all mean? This 2025 shutdown, now the longest ever, it really throws a spotlight on this massive tension, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. On one side, you have this undeniable pressure for fiscal responsibility in the long term. You look at that mandatory spending trajectory, that $18 trillion figure. It's a serious problem that needs addressing.
But on the other side,
On the other side, you have the political reality of how these fights actually play out. The negotiators didn't tackle the giant mandatory spending issue. Instead, the entire battle, the thing that shut the government down, focused on a popular discretionary program, the ACA Subsidies.
a program costing about $35 billion a year.
Right. Even while much larger annual tax cut costs weren't really on the table, and even when members of their own party were saying, wait, don't cut this.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, the argument for fiscal restraint, controlling debt for future generations, it's a powerful one.
It is. But the source data here forces you, the listener, to ask some tough questions about the political application of that principle. The annual cost of those ACA subsidies, the ones causing the entire shutdown. Less than 5% of what we spend each year on the Department of Defense.
Which is approaching $1 trillion a year now.
Getting close to it.
Yeah.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. If pure fiscal discipline is the absolute #1 driving force behind enduring the pain of a record-long shutdown, why do the negotiations invariably end up focused on making cuts or temporary suspensions to specific social programs that cause immediate visible disruption, while the vastly larger defense budget remains almost entirely untouched, especially when you see NATO allies increasingly relying on U.S. military spending?
It suggests the fight might be less about the abstract numbers on a spreadsheet.
And maybe more about fundamental political choices, about priorities, about who ultimately pays the price and who benefits from government spending or from its absence.